Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. Our life together had always been a delicate dance of routines and surprises, a blend of stability and adventure. Sarah and I were inseparable, and every day seemed to confirm that we had found something special. We had built our life brick by brick, from our cozy apartment in the city to our weekend hikes and spontaneous trips. I remember the day Sarah came home with the news about her new job at Apex Solutions. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she burst through the door. "I got it," she exclaimed, holding up the offer letter like a trophy. "I'm officially the new marketing manager at Apex." I set down the book I was reading and looked up, my face breaking into a wide grin. "That's incredible, Sarah. I'm so proud of you. This is a big step." Sarah's excitement was infectious. "It really is. The team is amazing, and Dan, my new manager, is such a visionary. I feel like this is exactly what I've been looking for." We celebrated that night with dinner at our favorite Italian place. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, Sarah talked animatedly about her new role. "Dan's got this way of making everyone feel like they're part of something big," she said. "And the team? They're so dynamic. I think I'm really going to thrive here." I listened, my heart swelling with pride and happiness for her. "I know you will. You've always had this incredible drive. I'm just glad you're finally getting the opportunity you deserve." Over the next few months, Sarah's enthusiasm for her new job was palpable. She came home with stories of brainstorming sessions and late-night projects. Her new colleagues quickly became a central part of her life. It wasn't long before she started mentioning her friends from work, often glowing about their influence on her. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, Sarah said, "You know, Mark, I've been thinking. Some of my new friends have this really open-minded approach to relationships. It's kind of refreshing." I looked at her, puzzled. "Open-minded? How do you mean?" Sarah stirred the pot on the stove and shrugged. "Well, it's not just about work. It's about life. They talk about exploring new ways of thinking about relationships, and it's making me question things." I felt a twinge of unease but masked it with a smile. "It sounds like you're really immersing yourself in this new environment. Just make sure you're staying true to what matters to us." Sarah's smile was reassuring. "Of course, I am. It's just interesting to consider different perspectives." As the weeks turned into months, the subtle shifts in Sarah's demeanor became more apparent. She was spending more time at work, attending social events with her new friends, and her conversations increasingly revolved around them. One night, after she'd come home late from an office party, I confronted her. "Sarah, you've been out a lot lately. Is everything okay?" Sarah looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "It's just work, Mark. We've been brainstorming for a big project." I didn't realize it was so late. I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's not just tonight. It's been happening more frequently. I just want to make sure we're on the same page." Sarah sighed and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I understand. I guess I've been caught up in everything. But trust me, nothing's changed between us." Despite her assurances, a seed of doubt was planted. I wanted to believe her, but the growing distance between us was hard to ignore. The turning point came one evening when Sarah casually brought up the idea of an open marriage. "You know, Mark, some people I've met believe in exploring their relationships in new ways. What do you think about that?" I nearly dropped my fork. "An open marriage? Where is this coming from?" Sarah looked at me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I just think it's something worth considering. It's not about me not loving you, it's about evolving and exploring what else is out there." The proposal was jarring, and I struggled to process it. "I'm not sure, Sarah. This is a big shift. Do you really think this is the right path for us?" Sarah's eyes softened. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think it could benefit us. I believe it could bring a new dimension to our relationship." We spent the next few days discussing the concept, weighing the pros and cons. Despite my reservations, I agreed to give it a try, hoping it would help us navigate the new dynamics in our relationship. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a complicated journey. In hindsight, that decision would mark the start of a series of events that would test our marriage in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The trust we once had was about to be challenged, and our commitment to each other would be put to the ultimate test. The decision to open our marriage had seemed like a noble experiment at the time. We carefully established boundaries and agreed on full transparency, but theory rarely survives contact with reality. What I had hoped would enrich our relationship instead began to unravel it. In the first few weeks, Sarah appeared energized by her new freedom. She would come home late, often after attending social gatherings or work events, and her stories about these outings became increasingly vague. Her explanations were usually wrapped in optimism, but there was an underlying current of evasiveness. One evening, after Sarah had been out at what she called a team-building event, I found myself growing increasingly uncomfortable. I confronted her as she walked in, her face flushed from the evening's activities. "Sarah, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Sure, what's up?" she replied, hanging her coat. "I just feel like you're spending a lot more time away lately. And you're being really vague about what's going on." Sarah frowned and set her bag down. "It's just work stuff, Mark. You know how demanding these projects can be." "But it's not just work," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "I've seen texts from Dan on your phone. It's starting to feel like there's more going on." Sarah's eyes widened, and she took a step toward me. "Dan. It's nothing, Mark. He's just a colleague. You're reading too much into this." Despite her reassurance, a seed of doubt had been planted. My own reactions began to shift from jealousy to disillusionment. The trust one once had in our open arrangement started to erode, leaving me feeling unmoored. The emotional distance between us grew. I sought solace elsewhere, finding comfort in Emily, a coworker who had always been kind and understanding. She was a breath of fresh air, and our growing connection provided a stark contrast to the emotional emptiness I felt with Sarah. One evening, as we were having dinner at a cozy cafe, Emily reached across the table, her eyes full of concern. "Mark, you seem so distant lately," she said softly. "Is everything okay with Sarah?" I sighed, pushing my plate away. "It's complicated. We're trying something new, an open marriage. But it's not going as planned. I feel like I'm losing her, and I'm not sure how to handle it." Emily's hand rested on mine. "I'm here for you. If you need to talk or just need a break from all of this, you know I'm here." Her support was comforting, but it came with its own complications. I started spending more time with Emily, and our relationship deepened. As much as I valued Emily's presence, I knew that my growing connection with her was part of the unraveling of my marriage with Sarah. The turning point came when I discovered more about Sarah's involvement with Dan. One night, after Sarah had come home particularly late, I found a series of messages between them on her phone. They were intimate, filled with coded language that left little to the imagination. It was clear that their relationship had crossed the boundaries we had set. I waited for Sarah to come to bed, my mind racing. When she walked in, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice tight with emotion. Sarah looked at me, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I held up the phone. "What's this? It's clear you and Dan have been involved far beyond what we agreed on." Her eyes filled with tears as she sat down beside me. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. Dan. He manipulated me. He made me feel like our marriage was the problem." The admission was a blow. "Sarah, you broke our trust. You promised transparency, and this is what I found. It's not just about physical boundaries, it's about our emotional connection, which you've shattered." Sarah reached out, her voice choked with regret. "I know. I realize now how wrong I was. I thought I was doing something liberating, but it just made everything worse. I didn't see it until it was too late. Our marriage was fraying at the edges, and as Sarah's words sank in, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. The emotional damage was compounded by the reality of Sarah's involvement with Dan, which had strained our relationship beyond repair. As Sarah and I sat in the aftermath of our conversation, the weight of our situation bore down on us. The open marriage had not only failed to enrich our lives but had led to a painful realization of our own vulnerabilities and mistakes. I found myself questioning the future of our relationship and grappling with the consequences of decisions that had seemed so logical in theory but were devastating in practice. The days following the discovery of Sarah's involvement with Dan were a blur of anguish and disbelief. Sarah had admitted to crossing our boundaries, but the full extent of her betrayal became clear only after several agonizing conversations. Her remorse was palpable, but the damage had already been done. One afternoon, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the room's silence heavy with unspoken words. Sarah's eyes were red from crying as she turned to me, her voice trembling. "Mark, there's so much I need to explain. I never intended for things to spiral like this." I sat across from her, feeling numb. "Sarah, you broke our trust. I'm struggling to understand why you didn't stop when things started going wrong." Sarah took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I got swept up in Dan's charm and the excitement of this new world. I thought I was just exploring new possibilities, but Dan, he made me believe that our marriage was holding me back. I was so confused, Mark. I thought I was making things better, not worse." Her confession was a bitter pill to swallow. "But how could you let it go this far? I trusted you to respect our boundaries." Sarah's face crumpled as she reached for my hand. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how deep I was getting involved until it was too late. Dan had this way of making everything seem like it was for the best. He played on my insecurities, making me think our marriage was stifling me." I pulled my hand away, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. "So, Dan manipulated you into thinking our marriage was the problem. But what about your friends? They were a big part of this, too. Did they encourage you?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, they did. They were so open about their own unconventional relationships and made me think that it was the right path. They never questioned Dan's influence or how it was affecting me." The realization of the extent of Sarah's exposure to these ideas was painful. "And now? What happens now? You're saying you were misled, but the damage is done." Sarah's voice was filled with desperation. "I've realized how wrong I was, Mark. I left my job and cut ties with Dan and my friends. I'm seeking counseling and trying to understand why I let this happen. I want to make things right between us, but I understand if you're not willing to try." Her sincerity was evident, but it did little to ease my inner turmoil. "You can't just undo the hurt, Sarah. This has changed everything. The trust we had is gone. I don't even know where to begin to rebuild it." Sarah's shoulders slumped, and she sat in silence, the weight of her actions hanging heavily in the air. "I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try to fix this. I'll go to therapy, work on myself, and whatever else you think might help." Despite her willingness to change, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I had also been seeing Emily, and our relationship had deepened. Emily's support had been a lifeline, and I was torn between my commitment to Sarah and the comfort I found with her. One evening, as I sat with Emily in her cozy apartment, she looked at me with concern. "Mark, I can see how much this is affecting you. What are you thinking about doing?" I looked at Emily, my heart heavy with conflict. "Sarah is trying to make amends, but I don't know if it's enough. I'm so conflicted. Part of me wants to try to rebuild, but another part of me feels like it might be too late." Emily reached out and took my hand. "I care about you, Mark. But you need to make a decision that's right for you. If you feel that moving on is what you need, I'll understand. Just make sure you're making the choice for yourself, not out of guilt or obligation." Her support was comforting, but it didn't make my decision any easier. Sarah's efforts to repair our marriage were earnest, but the emotional damage was profound. I was grappling with feelings of betrayal and confusion, trying to reconcile my past with the possibility of a future I wasn't sure I wanted. As I continued to navigate this complex emotional landscape, I was faced with the daunting task of determining whether to rebuild my relationship with Sarah or to move forward with a clean slate. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and I had to confront my own regrets and the reality of the choices I'd made. The aftermath of Sarah's revelations and the unraveling of our open marriage left me feeling adrift. Sarah had left her job, severed ties with Dan and her friends, and was now fully committed to making amends. Despite her sincere efforts, the wounds of betrayal ran deep, and I was struggling to process the emotional fallout. In the quiet of our living room, Sarah sat across from me, her face earnest. "Mark, I've done everything I can to make things right. I've quit my job, cut ties with everyone who influenced my decisions, and I'm seeing a therapist. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm asking for another chance." I stared at her, feeling a wave of exhaustion and confusion. "Sarah, I appreciate the steps you're taking, but it's not just about what you're doing. It's about what's happened between us. I'm not sure if I can just switch off how deeply hurt I feel." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached out. "I understand. I know I've made a mess of things. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just want you to know that I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to fix this." I nodded, though my heart was heavy. "I know you're trying, and I can see that. But the trust we had is shattered. I'm trying to figure out what's best for both of us, and right now, I don't know if I'm ready to rebuild." Sarah's shoulders sagged, and she pulled back. "I get it. I just hope that, in time, you can see how much I want to make this work." The emotional weight of our situation was compounded by my own evolving relationship with Emily. The support she had provided during this turbulent period had become increasingly important to me. One evening, as we sat together in a quiet cafe, Emily reached across the table, her voice gentle. "Mark, I know this is a difficult time for you. Have you thought about what you want moving forward?" I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. It's been so hard to make sense of everything. Sarah is trying to make amends, and I can see her efforts, but I'm so conflicted. I've been thinking about whether staying in the marriage is the right decision. Emily's gaze was steady and supportive. "Whatever you decide, you need to make sure it's for you. Your happiness matters, and it's important to take care of yourself in all of this." Her words resonated with me, but they also highlighted the difficult choices I faced. I continued my individual counseling, working through the layers of pain and betrayal that had surfaced. My counselor helped me navigate my feelings, offering perspective and support as I grappled with my next steps. One day, I sat down with my lawyer to discuss the legal aspects of potentially ending my marriage. The office was quiet, and the lawyer's expression was professional but sympathetic. "So, Mark, we need to outline the terms if you're considering divorce," the lawyer said, reviewing a stack of documents. "Are there specific concerns or conditions you have in mind?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I want to ensure that the process is fair and that Sarah has the support she needs. But I also need to think about what's best for me moving forward. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm ready to commit to ending things or if there's a chance for reconciliation." The lawyer nodded, making notes. "It's important to take your time and make decisions that align with your needs and goals. We can draft an agreement that reflects your considerations and ensure that everything is handled properly." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of clarity mixed with uncertainty. The possibility of divorce loomed large, but so did the idea of working through the pain and rebuilding. My counseling sessions and conversations with Emily had provided some direction, but the decision remained daunting. Sarah's desire to mend our relationship was genuine, but the emotional barriers between us were significant. I continued to navigate the complexities of our situation, trying to balance my feelings of betrayal with the possibility of healing. The path ahead was uncertain, and I faced the difficult task of choosing between attempting to salvage our marriage or moving forward with